Who didn't like Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory growing up? The 1971 movie starring Gene Wilder was the perfect holiday movie. And as a kid, it had chocolate and candy. It was bizarre and loads of fun. But now, as an adult, looking into the 71 film and reading Roald Dahl's original 1964 book, you might be surprised to realize sweet and quirky Willy Wonka is actually more of a sinister, dark man than he is a hero. Watching the Wonka prequel, which aimed to humanize the magical singing chocolate maker on his quest against the big bad chocolate cartel, it begs a lot of questions on how Willy Wonka developed to be such an eccentric and unpredictable character as he was portrayed in the 71 movie. How does a swirly-getting timid Wonka become the ever-enthusiastic chocolate maker? We bring you the real account of his story, which Warner Brothers neglected you of. So, it is time to get your hot chocolates ready, and let us dive right in. The moral of both Charlie and the Chocolate Factory and Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory is good children are rewarded and bad children are punished. Roald Dahl's original story condemns many things, including bad parenting, gum chewing, television, spoiling children, overeating, and self-indulgence. This is why we love the innocent, likable, impoverished Charlie. However, there's a darker theme lurking beneath the songs and the candy. Superficially, Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory is about candy and justice. In fact, the movie is about using slave labor to build an empire. And that message is not hidden at all. The book and movies ask children to celebrate Willy Wonka's exploitation of the Oompa Loompas by pitching it as a rags to riches story. But before we get into the Oompa Loompas, let's take a look at the character of Charlie. Roald Dahl's widow, Felicity Dahl, told the BBC that the children's author had written an early draft of Charlie and the Chocolate Factory in which Charlie Bucket was black. Mrs. Dahl called it a shame that his agent persuaded her husband to make Charlie white. But what was in the draft called Charlie's Chocolate Boy? In the original draft of Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, there was a magical chocolate factory and its owner, Willy Wonka, inundated by children who wanted to visit it. So he decided, instead of letting hundreds of children in, he'll give 7 golden tickets. There are 2 more children, and some of the names are different. Augustus Gloop was Augustus Pottle, Veruca Salt, Marvin Prune, and Miranda Piker, and of course Charlie Bucket, but in this version, he was a black boy. As the story went, Charlie ends up in the Easter room, where there are life-size candy molds of creatures, and one of these life-size molds is shaped like a chocolate boy. Charlie is fascinated by this. Wonka helps him into the mold and gets distracted. The mold closes and the chocolate pours over his body, and he is suffocating and nearly drowning in it. As it hardens around him, it feels terrible. He's trapped, he's alive, but can't be seen or heard. No one knows where he's gone. Then he gets taken to Wonka's house to be the chocolate boy in Wonka's son's Easter basket. Charlie is waiting for the mold to be cracked open the next day when the son will get his Easter treats. That's when burglars come into the house to steal millions of dollars in jewelry. Charlie witnesses this. There are tiny eye holes in the chocolate, but they never realized the boy was alive, so he groans and alerts Wonka and his wife. Yes, Wonka's wife. That's a huge change in the published version we now know, in which Wonka is single and Charlie becomes his heir. In this original draft, he does not become his heir because Wonka already has a son, and so Charlie is not invited to be part of the family. The big reward is that Wonka gives Charlie Bucket a store in the city center. He names it Charlie's Chocolate Shop. And the happy ever after is that now Charlie owns a store and his friends can eat whatever they want there. Felicity Dahl said in the interview, "I think it is a really powerful racial allegory that might seem very surprising coming from Dahl. I think the mold in the shape of a chocolate boy is a metaphor for racial stereotype. In the early 20th century, chocolate marketing in both the US and England was very tied up in imperialist fantasies and in connecting brown skin with brown chocolate. In one British ad for chocolate, for example, you had a black figure holding a cocoa bean and happily bestowing it on white children. So I think it's neat that in this mid-century moment, Dahl had this black boy get stuck inside a mold that fits him perfectly. He emphasizes that everything about the mold fits Charlie, except once the chocolate inside the mold hardens, it's uncomfortable. So what better symbol of what it's like to be turned into a racial stereotype than a black boy who gets stuck inside a life-size chocolate mold and can't be seen or heard through this chocolate coating. Apparently, according to Felicity Dahl, although the first Charlie and the Chocolate Factory may have seemed racist, it was actually supposedly anti-racist. But then again, what got published was a white Charlie, and on top of that, the Oompa Loompas which appeared made the book into one of the most racially stereotyping books of its era. Charlie and the Chocolate Factory is published in the US in 1964 amid the civil rights movement in the US and race riots in England. Dahl should have been aware that the happy slave was not a permissible stereotype, and yet in the original edition, Oompa Loompas were a tribe of African pygmies. I think this arc, from what I find to be a fairly anti-racist novel, to the novel that had been rightly criticized for its racist and imperialistic politics, what it really shows is Dahl's ambivalence. I think we're in the right cultural movement to understand that. So I think it's really telling that Dahl seems to identify with this vulnerable character. I mean, he himself was the son of a Norwegian immigrant and was bullied at British boarding schools. I think Dahl always felt like an outsider who was bullied into Britishness. So why did Roald Dahl have to change the story and make Charlie white? He is sent to his literary agent and friend, Sheila St. Lawrence, and she immediately wrote back, "Please don't make Charlie black." The depressing thing about all of this is that the whole message of Charlie's Chocolate Boy seems to be how painful it is for a black person to be reduced to an object and treated with violence, and then the Oompa Loompas are all objects. Wonka tests his candies on them as though they are expendable. Now that we all have a little perspective of how the story was created and viewed, let's take a look into the book to judge for ourselves. To understand what Willy Wonka is really about, you have to look at the story from the point of view of the Oompa Loompas, the little people who do the actual work in Wonka's factory. Years before Charlie had his visit to the factory, Willy Wonka ran his candy business with regular workers, not little funny-colored people. But because Willy Wonka was the greatest candy maker in the land, his enemies sent spies into his factory, stole his ideas, and recreated his greatest candy creations. This produced overwhelming paranoia in Mr. Wonka. His solution? Fire all his workers and shut down his factory. In fact, it's revealed in the '71 film that Grandpa Joe used to work in Wonka's factory and was one of the unlucky workers let go. The degree of misery caused by Wonka's decisions never made it into the story. We also hear nothing about the town where the factory resides. It's probable that the city, or at the very least, neighborhood, was decimated by that decision. Instead of being thought of as a villain, Willy Wonka is considered a hero. He's the creative genius whose only flaw was not being free enough to do his thing. So what was Willy Wonka's solution to the spying conducted by his enemies? Slave labor. In Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory, the factory is run by little colored people from a faraway exotic land. Very interestingly, they could be described as colored even in the 70s. In the 2005 film, the Oompa Loompas are of Indian descent, which essentially signifies that Wonka outsourced his entire operation. In the book, they are simply described as very small, no taller than your knee. We never hear the Oompa Loompas' version of the events. It's undoubtedly different from Willy Wonka's recollection. Remember when slave masters brought Africans to America in the name of Christian righteousness? They justified their systematic brutality as civilizing primitive people, using the hymns that enslaved Africans sang as proof of their happiness. Oompa Loompas toiled in Wonka's factory for years to make it a success. And while not clear in the 1971 film, in the novel the Oompa Loompas are paid, not in money but in cocoa beans. Even Dahl's language is dripping with imperial condescension. You only had to mention the word cocoa to an Oompa Loompa and they would start dribbling at the mouth. Through deconstructing the simply wonderful Oompa Loompas, we can now understand the underlying colonial context and severe issues associated with the beloved's children's story. Willy Wonka was certainly not a man to worship, and his chocolate factory, as dreamy as it was built on exploitation. But now subsequent adaptations have been made obligated to reimagine both Wonka and the Oompa Loompas as different than the text portrays them, like in Timothée Chalamet's Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory.
What do you think? Comment down in the section below and don't forget to like and subscribe.